Greetings, free people, fighting racism and racial discrimination. Now, we said people of African descent. This is a term that is used for the Jamaican citizen and for the mainland corporate citizens. This is why they call them African American. However, I share the UN information, yeah, and then I got slipping on my notes. I'm trying for those probably a few and shut it down. Well, depending on the energy. Now, this United Nations documents a fight racism, and it's a people of African descent, human rights, not racism. There them can look at these. There them we'll bring it up and, deal with as we go along. Now touch on the background, I'm not necessarily ever going at this thing per se. But the background I said around 200 million people identify themselves as being of African descent, live in the Americas. Many millions more live in other parts of the world outside of the African continent. Now it's whether as descendants of the victim of the transatlantic slave trade or as more recent migrants, they all constitute some of the poorest and most marginalized group. It goes on to say for centuries, people of African descent were marginalized as part of the legacy of slavery and colonization. Goes on to say there is a growing consensus that racism and racial discrimination have caused people of African descent to be held back in many aspects of public life. They have suffered exclusion and poverty and are often invisible in official statistics. There has been progress, but the situation persists to varying degrees in many parts of the world. Now, may I touch upon my notes now and I look at it and I say, who are these people, these 200 million people identifying as Africans? I go on to say West Indian descent, ancestry, and heritage. First, we must remove the presumptive African descent from us and correct the record as American West Indians in general and Ahuuakh Indians to be specific. Now, this is when, according to your individual nation, this is the collective body of a different tribal affiliation come together and said, this is who is before the invaded colonizers come here. We have many Indian nations. Yeah. And various or a variety of tribes. Tribes that are really a bloodline. And then the associated ones, Confederacy would have come together as that nation. This section, that section, that section, that section. These are the concept, the idea. So when we are expressive, we can have some kind of context. If you align yourself with. So first we must remove the presumptive African descent from us and correct the record as West Indians or American Indians or Ameri-Indians, however you want to choose in general. And then your specific, society, whatever it is, but they still exist in the Americas, which is North and South. We, as Ahuuakh Indian, located in what they call Jamaica, what they have in Northern America, North America, this is where we locate. And by the division of the equator going below that, then that's what I would call the South America. It's all in the Western Hemispheric region. Now we said the West Indians of the Americas has the absolute authority as a fundamental right to self-identify and to self-determine their own sovereign or free state of condition, and would never, under any circumstance, identify themselves as African descent when there is absolutely no blood relation that is established or that can be proven. Which African man I was saying related to me, and me and Fiend blood match up. Let's present that African right here. Present it. Impossible. This is the deception out there. Yeah, man. And then full joy, the assimilation, where them perpetuate. This is why we have to deal with specificity. We have to be specific. Yeah, man, we have to be specific out there. Now, at the graveyard shift, so, yeah, at a time when the ones that are really shut down, and the I ones that are really, yeah, apply themselves. Now, again, when them say fundamental right to self-identify, that means not political entity, agency, or, agents can identify you. You have the right to identify yourself. So if you choose to be a Martian, you create a document and structure it as such and express it. You understand? Remember, it's a corporation. Make a stipulation saying once you born within the corporate man-made country or the corporate man-made state or even the corporate man-made county, then you're automatically a citizen of such. That's what I'm writing on them people. However, you have to choose to renounce that way. You rebut that presumption. Now that citizenry has to be laid on that piece of legal entity where it exists as it is now within a legal society, yeah, which is being, administrated by the executive body. Yeah, but really the ones that were applied or enforce anything at all, I forgot through them to be serious. And legal society, and legal council, and everything is legal. This is why I'm saying they can only interact or interface with a legal entity, never the man or woman. Yeah, the male or female, maybe only because that is expressed as a legal entity. This is the clarity. And all of these usurpation and reclassification that come from the colonization. This is what colonization does. It reclassifies the original West Indians of the Americas into Moors and Maroons of African descent by way of the pen, the colonial education, and the foreign indoctrination. The West Indians are, in fact, the West Indians are, in fact, the original Americans, the invading Spanish people, and the Moors of Spain with Christopher Colon of the Knights of Columbus declared they discovered when they first entered the American hemispheric region, or this Western territory. The West Indians of the Americas seems to be invisible to the colonized world's official statistics intentionally. Now, the indigenous status is where they would have classify West Indians, where you'd have say declare themselves as such. This is why we have to deal with specificity. Remember, we are dealing with legality, them a legal entity, however, them have to follow proper legal standards or proper rule. Well, them themselves prescribe for themselves. Is when them go outside or beyond the scopes of those limitations, that's when we have issues in the public. So, it's just an effort to bring clarity. So the ones them have to choose for us, correct them status. Literally. Yeah, man. I alone can do it. Yeah. And there's a lot of ones that do these things out there, but everybody have their own way, their own approach, and their own style. Yeah. I'm sure I'm on one style where fit everybody. That's impossible. This is why I'm say the West Indian specifically. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. American West Indian or West Indian of the Americas. You know what I mean? And that would be the general term. When we say Ahuuakh Indian nation, that's when we're specific. That's when we have with different tribes or with different houses come together and organize themselves as a society on paper, literally. And all of this are in our sovereign state capacity. All of this are when we are express ourselves as being free. Never know cult type of thing. This is why you have to express yourself, make your declaration. Yeah, man. You can't allow me to do it for you when it's your situation. What we can do is just what we are doing. Present information that people can probably scrutinize and seek alternative to the, let's say, compulsive demand of these foreign people. We shouldn't have a problem of challenge these things, especially when we're not sure, we're not know, we're not clear. Yeah, man, we should be able to say, boy, who are these people, these 200 million people identifying as Africans outside of Africa? Nonsense. This is colonization. Nonsense. However, if one chooses to stay silent with these things, then yeah, the silence will be taken as agreement. This is why them will say the African American, them under pressure, them under oppression, and all of these things. And I said, yeah, why not? Because if you don't know who you are to separate from the colonization and the oppression, then it's to your own detriment. Anyway, I don't go much far with this thing, but since we're there, I might as well share this little information. Well, I'm under the here prepared another yard man narrative.
How centuries of colonial oppression have left their mark on Jamaica's mental health. By Frederick W. Hickling, University of the West Indies, Jamaica. In colonial Jamaica, our greatest mental health challenge has been to counter the psychological impact of 500 years of European racism and colonial oppression. For the West Indians of North America, along with descendants of African people enslaved in Jamaica, this has been a process of dismantling the colonial policies and structures that saw thousands of Jamaicans incarcerated in lunatic asylums, while also seeking ways to heal the historical legacy of sustained structural violence and abuse that remain potent causative factors in contemporary mental illness. The chains they bind. To comprehend the depth and complexity of this challenge demands that we consider Jamaica's colonial history and, in particular, the sugarcane plantation system that underpinned British colonial rule. It was a system buttressed by the ideology of white supremacy and engineered through brutality and fear. Huge tracts of fertile arable land were seized by the British, and thousands of Africans ripped from their homeland to provide free forced labor. The slaves cleared the land, planted and cared for the cane, and cut and transported the crop for sugar extraction in the plantation factories, all at the end of a gun and in fear of their lives. Enslaved people were regarded as only three-fifths human, reared for subservience and exploitation. The slave master was a cruel and vicious ruler, and collectively these murderous masters established a ruthless system of law that entrenched white supremacy through the creation of a social economy and a system of military control and punishment. This meticulously manicured system of apartheid privileged the rights of Englishmen and relegated all others to inferior status at best and non-personhood at worst. Enslaved Africans either adapted or perished. Many fundamental aspects of society were fashioned by this colonial apartheid system: the military, judiciary, police, prisons, education, and health, including, of course, mental health. In the initial period of slavery, a slave displaying signs of severe mental illness could and would be summarily executed. Later, in 1851, An American physician called Samuel Cartwright described dysesthesia Ethiopica, a so-called mental illness affecting slaves, the symptoms of which included disobedience, answering disrespectfully, or refusing to work. Post-emancipation, the sole care model for mentally ill Jamaicans was the Bellevue Lunatic Asylum, a vast Victorian institution built by the colonial government in 1862. Bellevue underlined and echoed the same principle of involuntary incarceration that had been a brutal hallmark of the slavery system. Among those incarcerated in desperate and deplorable conditions were political activists such as Rastafari and others displaying unusual or bizarre methods of expressing resistance to colonial apartheid. When, more than 100 years later, I found myself working as a consultant psychiatrist at Bellevue, I would learn firsthand of the depth and complexity of the mental, social, and political enslavement imposed on Jamaican people. It was 1974 and Bellevue still housed 3,000 people within its walls. The dawn of independence. Understanding the reality of post-colonial mental enslavement is extremely difficult for someone who has never lived in a colonial society. This is especially true for citizens born after the colonizer grants political independence and withdraws. I was born in British colonial Jamaica in the dying months of the Second World War, and my appreciation of the effects of British colonialism was vivid. My parents were tertiary educated black Jamaicans, members of what was then a small intelligentsia descended from enslaved Africans. My father, a colonial civil servant, was the son of free coloreds from the parish of Manchester, and my mother a black concert pianist from Kingston. My secondary schooling was at an establishment lead by John Walmer, a wealthy white British goldsmith, for the education of poor whites and free coloreds. My parental home in Kingston was 10 minutes walk from a military base which stationed 5,000 British soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry. I was made uncomfortably aware of British colonial racism as a teenager when I was ambushed by the white soldiers' sons who attended my school. I escaped a beating by fleet-footing it into my home, just across the road from the parked army lorry that transported the soldiers' children to and from school. After centuries of struggle against British enslavement and colonialism, political independence finally came in 1962 and the process of dismantling the architecture of apartheid began. It was slow but relentless. When a commercial bank employed its first black bank teller, many Jamaicans journeyed to witness the strange sight. Thousands migrated to Britain, all on the invitation of the empire, to help the post-war rebuilding efforts there. Rastafari was emerging as a countercultural political religious movement that would be active in the decolonial struggle worldwide for decades to come. But the birth of political independence also ushered in the pioneers of modern Caribbean mental health care, with the University of the West Indies at the helm. This cohort of indigenous psychiatrists led a revolution in psychiatric treatment. Jamaica had begun a worldwide movement against colonial custodial approaches to the treatment of mental illness. Unchaining mental health. So, how do you decolonize a mental health system? First, we trained our own psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses, then began a process of moving mental health care out of the lunatic asylum and into the community. In 1961, the University of the West Indies appointed its first professor of psychiatry, Michael Beaubrun. Professor Beaubrun taught community psychiatry in a general hospital, which was, and remains, a pioneering move. Treating psychiatric patients in open wards of general hospitals lessened the stigmatization of the mentally ill and placed them in a normal hospital environment, rather than the confines of an asylum. These moves marked the start of vigorous strategies to downsize and dismantle Bellevue, the colonial model of treating mental illness by custody in an institution, and a shift towards community-based models of treatment. Today, Jamaica's community mental health services provide outpatient care, crisis intervention, and outreach. GPS and community mental health officers see patients in primary care and outpatient clinics. Psychiatry has been significantly integrated into general medicine, and the stigma of mental illness has significantly declined. Crucially, community mental health care has replaced the traditional approach marked by involuntary certification and incarceration. These successes, however, would unmask complex challenges for post-colonial Jamaica. Today, the legacies of slavery still reveal themselves in contemporary psychological problems, authority issues, oppressive or authoritarian sexual and social practices, and dependency issues. The uneven distribution of resources in the post-colonial era fueled sprawling social and economic inequality and disenfranchisement, giving rise to a society where a culture of violence has become the norm. Today, Jamaica's murder rate is nearly 8 times the global average and the third highest in the world. Dream a New World. In 2006, the University of the West Indies established the Caribbean Institute of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, offering a range of outreach services, training and interventions, but including an emphasis on cultural therapy, where creativity is used as a means of healing and as a way to explore and express painful issues. The Institute is unique in Jamaica in its focus on measures to prevent, rather than cure, mental illness by looking at the risk factors and finding ways to negate them at an early stage. Among the Institute's successes is the award-winning Dream a World Cultural Therapy Project, which began in inner-city communities in the grip of violence and gangs. The project was initially aimed at high-risk primary school children who lived fragmented lives, often overshadowed by violence and hardship. These children were severely disruptive in school, underachieving academically, and at risk of facing problems in later life. The project combines cultural therapy, using group drama, song, and dance, with remedial teaching in maths and literacy to increase self-esteem and improve academic performance. As a core part of the project, children are asked to imagine, dream, a new world on another planet. They name their imaginary world, conceive its inhabitants, and consider what they would take with them from their known world and what they would leave behind. They imagine what they would look like and what role they would play in governing their new world. Then, working with artists, the children learn to play musical instruments and compose songs, poems, and dances to bring their dream world to life.
Now, I must say, I'm not sure if our system where administrate the public implement any of these things, or if any of it is active. Well, I can say I remember a couple of years ago, a sister where we used to know had a brother that have a mental disorder, and he was aggressive, in fact dangerous. In fact, so dangerous, I think that was one of the primary reasons that sister had to relocate. However, the sister wasn't the only one there. There was a younger sister and the mom were the violent son literally abused, and the mother called police. Police come, take him away for a little bit, and then just carry him back home. Nobody from nowhere, no outpatient care, no nothing at all. So when I share this information, I said them thing I probably didn't implement early after the independence, but then it dissolved or disappeared. We know mental illness is a pandemic here. It's just that and everybody get the psychological evaluation and just use that as a tool for quiet some people, and restrict other people. But I know for a fact where a lot of people where you say every day up and down will always feel a psychological evaluation. Yeah, man. Them will take it all 3, 4, 5, 9, 10 times and them are gonna fail. But Them a function out there, you know. Them are that. Them after. Yeah, man. And the one them what can't, them just dissolve and, you know, yeah, eventually them will reach Bellevue. Eventually. But most of them in a GP, in a medical facility, a lot of them under psychological evaluation, but I don't think them really have them kind of issue that opposed to them might have criminal issues and one just can't really hold them no other way but to just keep them like that, especially if them get them a take medication. But you know the mental health is an issue um, and I'm not what I really toy about. Um, with a new shift that is here, this new era where information is so much and misinformation is even so much more. Then you have a lot of mental breakdown out there. People not prepare themselves and try to compartmentalize them information. Yeah, more people are end up at a shutdown and don't want to look at nothing, don't want to read nothing, and literally don't want to hear them. Yeah, man. Mental breakdown. And listen to people when they say it, I've seen it. Yeah, man. So a man literally make my nose them pop down. Yeah, man. And even when them recover for talk to me, when them a talk to me, I'll be crying, like straight crying. And now me can understand, sir, all of that was because of the deception, you know. You know, live true to what it is. You know, live true to your nature. Yeah, man. So you defraud yourself, you defraud the people and where you try to gain as friends, and then you end up a defraud the populace where you might have choose to engage with. And why you end up a defraud everybody is because you're disingenuine. I saw it going on, you know, authentic. So these things were really lick out your head top. Uh, we know truth are sovereign and truth will always stand the test of time. Always. And anything where outside of truth will literally expose itself and fall away. Yeah, man. Again, fighting racism and racial discrimination. And it's a people of African descent. It not really apply to the West Indians, especially ones where renowned from the citizenry and declare themselves expressively as such. Yeah, man. Usually then we have a house seal to express that. Yeah, man. So again, we have to try to avoid the complexity as best as we can. If we have fiduciary trustee, we're supposed to administer the legal entity, then they're supposed to know their job. I don't think it's incumbent upon us to try to figure out these things where them not have a public school where teach these things to everybody. The moment I'm off to draw you in any kind of secret, private business area where you spend a bag of money and not realize what the slavery is, how to separate from the slavery, and you know, all they want to do a business to maintain the colonization, then something wrong. We rather say give it our thing off, F off. That's it. or tear up that mess and say, leave we alone. We don't know nothing about it. We don't want nothing to do with it. You understand? This is why we are claim our sovereignty. We are aligning ourselves with the Most High Creator of nature. And that we are doing. And we are doing it organically. Yeah, man, not just naturally. We are doing it organically. We are moved from the seed to the root. Yeah, man. And this is our clarity. So it's up to the eye to make sure so no one make no presumption say you are any African descent. That apply to the people who leave Africa and come here, whether them come on slave ship or they migrate, but Babylon can't present no documentation of any of my ancestors that arrived on no slave ship here. You understand? This is what colonization is. How you know you're colonized? Look at the rules or regulation being imposed upon you. Remember, there is such a thing as fundamental rights and freedom, where Parliament can make no law, and no organ of the state can take no action to abridge, aggregate, or infringe your fundamental, inherent rights and freedom. So I clarity that now, step by step out there, complete gratitude for the time. Yeah, man. Remember them say rights of indigenous people. I guess all of these rights are political rights. You know what I mean? So when it's non-political, I guess, it's not supposed to apply to you. However, this is why them say the fundamental rights and freedom or its civil liberties is guaranteed and secured. So that's key right there. Anything else? Slavery. That's it. Give thanks for the time, give thanks for the moment. Again, information shared from our perspective. Complete gratitude out there.